name is Tess Dixon, DesignOps leader.
My guest today is Tess Dixon. With 20 years in tech, including a past life as Director of Support at Tumblr, Tess pivoted to design in 2019 and spent the last couple of years learning about and practicing design ops, most recently as Director of DesignOps at Conde Nast. She loves documentation, remote-first culture, getting things organized, and supporting an entire team with the best environment possible. I had a long conversation with Tess, and for that reason, there will be 2 episodes with her. The first one focuses on her background and role as Director of Support at Tumblr, whereas next week's one will be about her role as Director of DesignOps at Conde Nast. In this first episode, Tess talks about how product managers can work closely with support teams to understand user reactions to new features, how she introduced self-service support solutions to reduce support tickets, and how support teams can drive customer satisfaction and even sales opportunities.
Welcome to Product Perspectives, the podcast for product people that gives a voice to their stakeholders, hosted by Magali Pellissier. Each weekly episode shows you the other side of the product with interviews of the people who contribute to making products a success. They are engineers, writers, marketers, support analysts, UX designers, or even salespeople. Not only will they get the credit they deserve, but they will share their perspectives on what makes a good product and product manager. Stakeholder management is a key skill for product managers. So just as you're obsessed with listening to your customers, let's hear from your stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Tess, for being with me today. I'm very excited because this is the first time I talked to design ops leader. I have talked to product ops leaders. I have talked to UX designers and UX researchers, but never to someone in your role. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. And actually right now, you're actually on sabbatical. So how are you enjoying that?
Yeah, I am. It's amazing. I have been pretty much working nonstop or attending school full time since I was 15 years old. And I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate to this. Work just never stops. So I have wanted to take a break for a number of years and didn't find it financially feasible. But yeah, the opportunity presented itself and I just, kind of felt this growing sense that, okay, after this job, I should take a real break, like not immediately start looking for something else, but actually, take time to figure out who I am again when I don't have to show up for work every day. Actually spend time with my kids that's significant time, not just shoehorned in between this and that, and just live regular life like other people, I guess, do who don't work in tech. That being said, it's really interesting. And again, I think a lot of people who listen to this will relate. When you have like a chunk of time off that you're looking forward to, you think in your mind like, oh, it's going to be so awesome and free and luxurious and relaxing, but things and life fill up all the available space. And that's definitely been the case for me. So, as soon as I finished up my last role, things were kind of ramping up for the holidays with my neighborhood nonprofit that I'm really active in. So I had a lot of work to do for that, then kind of taking on a little bit more around the house and sort of swapping roles with my husband. And then it was Christmas and New Year's, and then we all got sick. And so here I am, having not really felt like I've had much of a break yet, but that's the nature of life.
I think that's what happens. We think it's going to be a break, and there's just so many things, and it ends up being as busy as when you were working, I guess, but in a different way. And I think what you're talking about, it makes me think of your background and your journey so far, because you've done lots of different things, right? You started in website management, database administration, even quality assurance. You've been a writer, and finally you moved to customer success and later design operations. So tell me a bit more about your journey. How did you end up in those different roles?
I fell into them. I think a lot of people have had the same experience as me. I majored in information systems and minored in fashion merchandising at VCU, which is kind of the big college that swallows up Richmond, Virginia, where I live. And I was looking for an internship my senior year, and I found the Math and Science Center, where my assignment was to manage a website that held science lessons that the instructors at this Math and Science Center would share with teachers out in the school districts, and they could kind of go off of these little science lessons that we had prepared on a website. So I just fell into that from interning there. After that, I got a job in QA once I graduated, because that was all I could find to apply for at the entry level. And this is, back in the dark ages when you had to scour the job ads in a newspaper rather than, going on Indeed.com or whatever other website you might look for jobs on now. And it was one of the only things that I saw that I could apply to, having no experience. And I went from there to work as a technical services specialist, which involved a lot of hardware setup and maintenance and resource planning, really just because I hated commuting to the suburbs every day for my, QA and then support job. And I wanted to walk or bike to work. So I was looking for something closer to, downtown where I lived. And, all throughout that time, kind of cutting my teeth in local tech companies, I guess I would say, I was really into blogging in my spare time. But I thought of that as a sort of fun, frivolous, indulgent hobby. You have to remember this was in the early aughts. Not that many people were making a living off of blogging or being an influencer. I mean, that word didn't really exist as it does today. And when a friend mentioned that he was going to be interviewing Tumblr's VP of support because Tumblr planned to open an office in Richmond, I kind of said to him, half joking, "Are they hiring? Can you find out if they're hiring?" And he came back to me a couple of weeks later and said, "Yeah, I did that interview, and he said they are hiring and you should contact him." So being that I guess in, this would have been late 2010, I was one of these few people who had lots of experience blogging and customizing blogs and stuff like that, as well as experience doing customer support. And he was basically like, "You're hired." So I guess it's a very specific skill set. But I was at Tumblr for 8 years, which I joke is having a job for 70 years in startup land. And I kind of went through all the different iterations of Tumblr. So, at first we were a teeny tiny startup. I think I was employee 20, just a few people in New York and a few people in Richmond having a conference call was basically what the company was. Then we were acquired by Yahoo. So I got to see what life was like with sort of a medium-sized, somewhat chill California overlord. And then Yahoo was acquired by Verizon, and I got to see what life was like with a big, gigantic corporate, more formal overlord. And after my 8 years at Tumblr came to an end, a former colleague reached out to me, Lydia White, who had led the design team at Tumblr in the past and remembered me fondly from those days. She was at Conde Nast and wanted to know, would you ever consider managing design people instead of support people? So I said, well, I'm not a designer by trade. And she said, I don't actually think it matters. So I decided to try my hand at it. And that's how I ended up at Condé Nast doing DesignOps.
Great. That's a great story. And I love how you have such a varied experience. I think there's such a wealth of knowledge that you've acquired. And I think the most interesting part of the story is how you're right, you just fell into it and you asked and there was a job and then it moved from a small startup to being acquired. And I just love that journey when it doesn't seem really planned, but you followed, I think, your instincts, what you wanted to do, and you've learned lots of skills along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think probably the biggest transition in there was, going from just doing quality assurance, so doing software testing, writing kind of like a bulleted list of actions that you needed to take to reproduce a bug, for example, and having my boss read these lists that I was writing and say, wait a second, you're good at writing. Like these are really easy instructions to follow. You should be in support. Like just kind of basically walking me down the hall and saying, you work in support now. I do have a knack for writing out a very simple list that a 5-year-old can follow of instructions.
So actually, let's start about that role as director of support at Tumblr. What were the main achievements there? Because as you said, there's been 8 years, so you had a lot of time to implement some changes, to see teams being built, to go through 2 acquisitions. What are you the most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't think a lot of customer support leaders often get asked about their achievements. I think people assume that support is this sort of clunky old cost center, and support people don't really achieve much of anything. They just kind of help keep the lights on or help, prevent like masses of people with pitchforks from showing up at the front door because nothing works. But I think that's dead wrong. So I love this question. I think the main thing I achieved was some semblance of stability there. Like I said, going through all those changes as a company and scaling our support team from, I think there were 8 people up to 26 or so maybe at the largest when I was there. There are a lot of ups and downs, especially as a startup. Like the focus of the company and the new features that are coming out, the pressure that's on the product team to come up with something new and interesting to drive more signups all the time. That's a roller coaster for support people because there are so many shiny new things being pushed to get launched all the time that they don't necessarily get the due diligence.
Yeah, I love this expression. It's a roller coaster for support teams.
Yes.
I wonder, it's the first time somebody puts it like this. And how do you write it? Like, what's the best way that you found working in that environment to deal with it and do the best and just make sure that you deliver good service to customers?
You don't have any prior experience to go off of, especially for a very unique community the way that Tumblr is. At first, I couldn't have predicted, what are the users' reaction going to be to like this new feature? But by the time I left there, I could predict with chilling accuracy what their reaction was going to be. And that was just through trial and error. So, I am like a very fastidious documenter and I keep a record of everything. So I kind of learned to do that the hard way, right? When, like let's say a feature comes out and your organization gets kind of burnt by certain aspects of that feature, when somebody else proposes something similar a year later and you're still there, you need to be the one to speak up and say, hey, we actually tried this already and here's why it went wrong, and not having that documentation, kind of not having kept that information and that data, for things such as ticket volume and stuff like that, or the occurrence of bugs or whatever it is. I think that makes a support leader's job really hard. So really just like coming in and immediately starting to get to know the community and kind of amass that type of data and getting to where you have like a natural feel for how a launch is going to go and what are the best ways that you can get out in front of it. What are the support blog posts that need to come out? What are the new help docs that need to be added? Like, what are the ways that you can kind of do damage control / just support the success of that launch? And I think that is all very hard work. It's some of the hardest work I've ever done. And the people who are out there in the trenches doing that work don't get a lot of credit for it, that's for sure.
That's true. I agree with that. And that's also why I've created this podcast, is because I really want to shine the light on people who do everything behind the scenes, because most of the times it's as product managers will get all the credit, but that's not what happens in real life.
Yes, that's so well adjusted of you to say that.
So actually, tell me about this experience and how you said you could predict almost the reaction of users to a new feature or of a change. Do you think the product managers knew that too, or did they lack that information? And that's why your experience was so important.
I think there can be a disconnect sometimes between what you as a a support leader might think of as institutional knowledge and what the product team actually knows or is thinking about or has in the top of their mind. Like, and I think some of the problem too is in a lot of tech companies, I'm not going to say just startups, especially not these days after the Great Resignation and all that stuff. Like, people have really short tenures. And I stayed at Tumblr for 8 years. I prefer to stay places a long time. That's just kind of like my nature. I guess I feel sort of uncomfortable and like a fish out of water for the first year plus when I start a job. I always feel like there's something new to learn. I don't feel like I am fully on top of things or like an expert yet. I very much look at everything as a learning experience. And so it really takes me that long to even feel like, okay, I'm an expert here now. You know, over the years at Tumblr, we had lots of great product managers who really got it, you know, who truly understood, hey, we should go and ask support about this, or who really listened when I showed up to their meetings and said, I'm waving a red flag because I'm scared about this and here's why, you know, and they really did listen. And then I think there are some people who just had been there for such a short time that it wasn't obvious to them, you know, what the writing on the wall was. And we had all these really specific sort of niche groups. So, for example, there was one of the sort of flagship features on Tumblr is a reblog. So you can just click reblog. I mean, it's just like a retweet, right? It just blogs the thing back onto your blog. And the formatting of this was sort of messy and made like a big, long, giant indented trail of comments, you know, leading back into eternity when something had been reblogged hundreds of times. And the team wanted to clean this up and make it, you know, more respectful of screen real estate. And there are all kinds of good reasons to do that. It was getting to be an old feature and kind of needed a cleanup aesthetically. But what wasn't really considered as, you know, like there was a group of people who used Tumblr very passionately to do like fanfics and to write stories collaboratively. So like, let's say I wrote a first paragraph and then you would reblog my post and you would add the second paragraph and then somebody else would reblog it and add another paragraph. And cleaning up the aesthetics of what that looked like and getting rid of that clear indented reblog trail, like ruined those people's lives, you know, by their claims. And they were a small but extremely vocal group. So, you know, there are times where product team will look at data and look at predictions and say, well, this isn't going to make these people happy, but they're only 0.5% of the user base. So we just need to push through and not worry about them. And then they do things like, you know, launch large scale campaigns and kind of like, you know, talk publicly and get other people riled up about, you know, how this feature has quote unquote ruined Tumblr or whatever it is. And those are the types of things that customer support people can predict and that customer support people can like help come up with solutions for.
Right. And I think you've given some great examples of what PMs can do, because as you said, there's lots of people who just join the company and they have to learn quickly, or some people they move on to the next job and then you lose that experience. And I think there were some great tips that you shared about the types of PMs as well who really make an effort to learn about the impact on the support teams and on the clients.
Yeah, and you know, when you have really listened to the users and really listened to the support team and the design team and whoever, you know, you don't necessarily have to do what they suggest, right? I mean, I think a lot of times you'll want to, because if you have truly been open-minded and truly listened, then you will see their point and you'll say, ooh, I didn't realize that. Okay, let me just tweak our plan here. You know, like maybe we should go back to the drawing board about this specific part of this feature or whatever it is. But sometimes I think you can listen to kind of those warnings, you can listen to those red flags, and you can make an informed decision. Like, no, we're going to go ahead with this as planned. We're also going to bake in a sprint, knowing what we know, to potentially fix some of this if it does blow up as you're predicting. You can do all kinds of different things to, I think, do the due diligence you need to be doing without necessarily caving to every single demand, because I'm sure if you do that, then you'll never release a new feature ever, because no new feature is going to be perfect for all the different sort of niche groups of users.
Yeah, I agree. And that's definitely something I've experienced, where if you listen to a support team and then you will release several months later or never, and there's going to be just so much work. But it's actually part of my job too, as a product manager, to make that decision and say, okay, well, I've got the information. Thank you very much, everybody. And I appreciate those risks, and I'm ready to go with them. And maybe we kind of put some mitigation, some plan in place to limit them, but making a decision so that we can still move ahead and do the release. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
You sound like a great person to work with as a product manager, because you seem to really want to work with the product team to obviously avoid the challenges that can have a negative impact on your team later. Do you think that, so you said there's different types of product managers, some of them were really engaged or not. Do you think that the majority of product managers have that mindset? Or did the people who were engaged reach out to you early enough, like at the beginning of the development cycle?
That's a great point. And I think that's part of the crux of the struggle, is that those people need to be in the room from the very get-go. But just by the nature of what they're doing, right? They're over here with their head stuck in the support queue, kind of like leading that stuff every day. They don't know about the meeting before the meeting before the meeting. So I think it's really hard for people to get themselves in the door of, being in the room where it happened, the place where people are just starting to ideate about that new feature. And a lot of times I think this can get really emotional. Like, let's say you've got a product person who, just feels really passionately about a feature, and, they've gone off and kind of written a nice long treatise about what they like to change and how they're expecting this to go. And then later, whether it's 1 week to launch or a month to launch or whatever, the support person sees this document and they're like, well, this actually it doesn't work like this. And I know that if we change this, like, these people are going to freak out, and starts kind of like marring this nice smooth surface that the product person has laid out. And I think product folks would do well to take that sort of thing less personally, because what you both want is the same thing, and that's for a launch to go well and be well received and to perform well. And the support person is maybe in their clumsy way trying to stop you from running into chaos. They're trying to head off some very preventable problems at the pass. And, ignoring the warnings is definitely not going to help the launch. But yeah, like you said, timing is everything. And it can feel much better for everyone when those opinions and those nuances are kind of entered at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. But that's a learning experience too. A lot of product folks have been burned by things like this before, so they've gotten to the habit of bringing in support, user research, all these other departments earlier on, rather than bringing them in as an afterthought.
To be honest, that's the kind of same message I hear from most stakeholders, is don't leave me at the last minute, because it's too late to change things. And I would say sometimes some PMs may do it on purpose, like if they've been burned in the past by the support team blocking a release, for example, because they don't have everything that they've demanded. I understand that some PMs would be a bit thinking, I'm going to tell them last minute. So there could be that type of behavior, which is not great, obviously. Sometimes the relationship with product management can feel a bit transactional. So I will help support out whenever there's a bug, or where there's a client with customer with escalating ticket, for example. And once that transaction is done, then that's over. I move on because as a PM, I'm busy and I have other things to do, right? But I think we should work towards making that relationship more fluid and much more regular than just some transactions like this.
What you said, that it is a relationship is very true and very important. I think a lot of times, like I said, even if you kind of hear the concern, but you're like, yeah, we're not concerned with that right now, though. Like, let's gloss over that. Let's move on. That feels so disrespectful to the person who spends their day in the support trenches and had to like work up a lot of courage to come to you at all with their concern, and for you to dismiss it is like, well, that kind of shows the person, well, I'm not going to bother to come to them again. And that's not what you want. I mean, you want an open relationship where that person feels heard and where they're very comfortable to come to you in the future with more concerns. And you might be extremely grateful for that in the future. So, it's not about like coddling anyone, but just seriously looking them in the eyes. I cannot tell you how important that is, but just over the years, there's been, the product managers who don't do that and the ones who really stop and they say like, can you show me a few examples of support tickets that have to do with this? And, those people, I felt like they actually cared. So even if they didn't ultimately implement the change I was suggesting or whatever, like I would come to them in the future with anything else I noticed or any potential pitfalls that came up.
Okay, so maybe we get into the more practical bits now. So what are those things that in general you would ask a PM? So they come to you saying, I've got this awesome new feature that I want to launch, and immediately you see some red flags. What are examples of red flags and actions that PMs should take to mitigate those?
I mean, some of them are just features being like really obtuse and difficult for a first-time user. Just the skill level or the familiarity level that it would take to use something or to even find it in a menu or whatever it is. Like those things are prohibitive to the users. And so maybe the feature's not going to be as amazing as you think it is if people can't even find it in the first place or if people don't even understand how to use it. A lot of folks want to be very lightweight with their designs and with how things appear on the screen. So we've moved away from things like, little tooltips or, any kind of little pop-up that indicates, hey, there's something new here, like here's a useful thing. But I hate that because as a person who has sat and read people's frustration and questions for years, it's like, oh, this could have all been prevented. And then sometimes it's the opposite thing. We want to change something and we want to make it really splashy and really cool and really sexy and make a big deal out of it and have like a little nag come down that talks about it. And you're just miring your power users. Like you're making it so that they can't opt out of that. There's no X. They can't get it off the screen. Like these people are like moving and shaking and rolling quickly through the application, and like they don't want to spend 40 extra seconds clicking through all of these pop-ups and stuff, So I think there's like part of it is like finding a sweet spot there with like, who do we think is actually going to be interested in this? What's the best way for that to get approached? Right? It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. There's a lot of nuance there.
And did you ever have a time when you said, no, you have to really go back to the drawing board and start from scratch, or even that very feature, like that very idea, it's not going to work. And the PM had to do significant work to change it. Or maybe they said, no, I'm confident, and they went ahead with it anyway.
So I don't think I felt confident enough till years into my career as a support leader. And the times that I did say that, like, I would say more often than not, those warnings were ignored. I don't want to be like, nobody listens to support, but you know what? Nobody listens to support. And a lot of times anyway, people don't listen to support. And what we end up doing instead of actually solving the root issues a lot of times is just like dancing around those issues with all the launch materials. So begging for this or that nuance to be mentioned in the post about the feature launch, or begging for a special blog post to be made about this part of it, or begging for there to be added like a little back door where people can click if they're having a problem with it. These little things that you can do to lessen the impact of something going wrong, which I hate because I think, oh gosh, it's so much better if it just works well and works the way that people would anticipate it to work.
Definitely. No, and I can definitely see that. I've been guilty of this sometimes. There is the part where you're really dealing with customer cases, and there is also a lot of organizing the support function and structuring it and bringing the right tools so that the support agents can really do their work. So one of the projects you've worked on as well was the migration from a legacy FAQ system to Zendesk. Can you tell me more about that? Because from a product manager, sometimes I don't see everything that's going on behind the scenes. What was the driver of the change, and what were the main challenges you faced along the way?
All of the research in the customer support space kind of points to the fact that users really prefer self-service. If they can avoid like waiting in a queue somewhere for someone to answer their question, whether it's via email or phone or whatever, they will avoid it, and they would much rather find the answer themselves. It's interesting because I think there's kind of a different school of thought that's like, no users should ever have to search for anything. Like, we should be there, like ready to live chat them as soon as they have a problem, and like, be very touchy-feely about it. And that's what people like. Those people are wrong. Like, these people don't want to talk to you. They want to find the answer to their question in a few keystrokes and then move on with their day. And that was really hard for us to do for a number of years because, we had this sort of legacy FAQ system. If you went to tumblr.com/help, it was like a search box, just a naked old search box, and you could type in your question. And if your question had one of, just like a couple hundred words or something, like really specific words, then these answers would appear. They would, sort of come up and you could click on them and read a little bit more. But it was very restrictive. There were only a certain number of articles that we could suggest to someone. Otherwise, they would fall off the end of the page. So if you typed in something that's very common problem, like login, you could only display a couple of results, which is not good because I don't know what their problem is. It could be all kinds of different things related to the large topic of login. And it was also difficult to maintain. It required like a pull request every time that you wanted to update a comma or something on this old system. But I think it worked fine for Tumblr when it was in its infancy and it was a less complex world, and there were only but so many problems that people were having. So, as the product matured, as there were more features, as there was more complexity and more different types of users, I wanted to address those things so badly, but almost every single thing people wanted or needed required them to submit a support ticket. So I, thinking about what are the solutions here, I just kept hearing more and more about self-service, and every conference I was going to was about that. So that's really what drove that. I could look around and see that many of our competitors and other people in the tech space were using, something like Zendesk's Help Center, if not the actual product itself, to facilitate all of their help documentation. And it was so easy to go through. It was like infinitely searchable. You could log in and customize it anytime you wanted to. It was like no problem at all to make changes for a launch or anything like that. Everybody in the support department was pretty sold on it easily. It was going to take effort from other departments to make it happen. And I think that was one of the most challenging things for me because I was very used to staying in my little garden. It increased traffic to our help documentation by 241%. There was, at the time, a 71% drop in support tickets created after people visited it.
Great. Well, here we go. You've got your biggest achievement, I think. One of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was important to mention this because we discussed it together before the interview, and I thought sometimes as product managers, we think that the support team just deals with support tickets and they're here to be annoying at each release. But there's so much more that's happening behind the scenes. And that is why we need to be conscious of your time as well. Just like we ask people to be conscious about our time as product managers, because there's so many big changes this is more than a technology change. This is like, where does the data go? We're providing the data, so all the content that goes into this new system. This is a people change as well. How do you train people with a new system? So there's so much going on other than just responding to customer tickets.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Really, I think businesses don't use them as much as they should use them. There are some companies that use their support team to drive sales deals and stuff like that, because they know that like the people who are contacting support are really loyal people who care enough about something to be contacting the support of that thing. And those are sometimes the most lucrative connections you have. And so there's a movement in the support industry to like turn those support interactions into sales opportunities.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. If you have suggestions for topics and guests, or any feedback, you can write to Magali Pellissier at hotmail.fr.